one thing that I see a lot of, and I'd be interested in your thoughts because you're the one that's done the research on this, but I would be interested in your thoughts. There is a lot of people or a lot of podcasts out there. I remember, I don't know if this is still true, but I know up until a few years ago, at least, it was true that the religion and spirituality section of the whole podcasts ecosystem is the largest. And the reason for that is because it's, so many churches just broadcast their sermons and stuff like that. So that it's one of those set and forget kind of things. What I'm curious about is, of the podcasts that you indexed, what are some of the types of shows that are out there? Because I think one of the reasons that a lot of people don't listen to a church's podcast is because it's just the sermons. They already got the sermon on Sabbath, or if they wanted to get it like that, they would have done that already. So people are wanting a different kind of format in the podcast world. So what are people doing and what is working?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I think that there's a lot to be explored. I was also just researching about religion and spirituality in that section. It is one of the fastest, it's the top tiered ranking in Apple Podcasts right now. It's just because how successful the church as a whole in the world has been able to create podcasts that is able to be nourishing for the spiritual members, for the spiritual life of the church members in their denominations or in their communities. So for example, like one of those podcasts is the the daily devotional podcasts, right? Where you have one Bible verse per day that gets released. A good example of that is it's the Psalms a Day by that podcast. The Psalm in a Day podcast is able to share one a day, and so just the very nature of that type of podcast, it's going to be consumed a lot more easier than if it was just say a podcast that was like a sermon podcast, like what you mentioned earlier.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. So I think one of the things that I would assume would make a big difference if a church or an individual is wanting to make an impact with their podcast, there seems to be the major formats, right? There's either the Bible study or Bible teaching, like you're kind of describing, or even or devotionals are a bit of a different category. But let's say there's that conversation aspect of it. So it's interviews or panel discussions. That's one format that happens. And so then, and as you mentioned, the devotionals, they happen. But I guess what I would suggest is that if you want to make an impact with a podcast in a market that's already flooded, you need to be providing something that they can't get somewhere else.
Yeah, because it's so saturated right now. There are a lot of good Christian programs out there for anyone to listen to. So yeah, you're right. It does have to be specifically catering towards specific need.
Yeah. Well, just even in my own example, the podcast, my original podcast, the one I mentioned before, that is a panel discussion. And there are now, when we started, there wasn't that many. And so we did quite well. Now there's panel discussions on the Bible everywhere, right? It's something that is quite common. And so really, we probably need to be thinking about how do we change that. This discussion, this podcast, we know exactly who we're talking to. We're saying, this is a podcast for Adventist leaders and administrators who care about technology. That's it. That's a very small number of people. And so the reason people listen to this show is because they know who they are and they know that this is important to them, because there's no one else that's having this conversation. And so I think at the local church level, you should be thinking about that, because a podcast is not only valuable if it has thousands of listeners all out there. You could be thinking about it purely in a local context. Let's say you set up a podcast studio at your church and you say, well, we want to be shown as a positive voice for change in our community, or that we want to advocate for the people in our community. Reach out, interview your mayor, interview the local councillors or your MPs, or prominent leaders in the community from either the church or the nonprofit sectors or whatever it might be. But the thing that does is that whilst the rest of the world may not care, the people that live around you will care, and they're the people that you actually want to come to your church, right? And the other beautiful thing is that if you have your mayor on the show talking about what they're doing to improve the city or whatever it might be, that conversation makes the mayor look good. Right, it makes the mayor, more known and gives them a platform. They share it, and then you, as a church, get to be the one that is shown to be bringing your community together, and you're doing it in a practical way. You're getting people together to dialogue about hard things. You could make it not a debate, but you could have like a series of dialogues, get people from different areas that have different viewpoints and mediate. Get if you're very good at that, that facilitation of discussion, get people to do that. But what you're doing is you're creating something that a very small group of people who you are trying to serve care about. Like, that's just one of the examples. But I think that if you give a lot of thought to how you can cut through the noise, then you stand a much better chance of having a podcast that people will actually listen to.
Yeah, you're totally right. And just for the sake of your listeners, I did some research and I found out that I think it was 21 out of the current 64 podcasts that are currently being released are all sermon podcasts. So they are just like you're recording the sermon. You may chop off the beginning and you chop off a bit of the end, after the prayer is finished, and then you post that onto the RSS feed, or you post that onto Spotify, or wherever you decide to distribute, and then it goes out like that. Now, what is the problem of just repurposing your audio? Well, like I said in my most recent article, it's like a passive strategy. It's not an active. You're not actively going out and talking to people, and you're not. It's just a one-way conversation. It's just, and actually, is it a conversation? I wouldn't even call it a conversation. It's just a monologue, right? You're just you're just hearing someone speak. I mean, that was a good, as a great thing to do, maybe when in the times of CDs, right? Because when you're using CDs as a medium, you can't have a conversation with a CD. You just put it on in your car and you play and you go to work, But not so anymore, because we live in an age where people can actively choose what podcasts they want to listen to. All you need to do is go on Spotify and scroll through the hundreds of thousands of episodes that are being released daily. You know what I'm saying? So what is stopping people from listening to your church's podcasts? What is stopping them from saying, I want to listen to this church's podcast? Because when I jump into some church's feed and I see that they're posting podcasts, I also look onto someone else's feed and I'm saying, oh, there's a 10-minute video about my favorite technology. Maybe Gemini AI just released a new feature or something like that. I want to learn about that. I'd much rather listen to a 10-minute instruction video on Gemini AI than on your church's 1-hour sermon that just got posted last Saturday. You know what I'm saying?
It's not accessible, right?
Yeah, it's not. It's totally not accessible in this day and age.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of the Blue Vineyard Podcast. For more episodes, information about our services and more, please visit bluevineyard.com.